Happy Sabbath to each and every one of you that are in cyberspace. We once again welcome you to the Three Angels Fellowship in Lancaster, California. I am privileged to be back with my sister fellowship to continue a work that we started on last Sabbath dealing with the spirit of oppression. And by God's grace, as we fellowship together through the internet, we are praying that you will pray with and for us as we seek to labor in word and also in doctrine, and that the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the Teacher of truth, will lead us and guide us into all truth for our message at this time. I want you to, wherever you are, please bow your heads with me as we have a word of prayer and open the Word of God together. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the life of our Lord Jesus Christ as we see what he did as he was anointed with the power of the Holy Spirit. He went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil, standing up for their rights and delivering and avenging them, and wanting to make the people free, not only physically, but also spiritually. And we too also want to be baptized with the same Holy Spirit, that we will have the fruit of the Spirit, that we will manifest it in not only word, but also in deed, that we might be the children of our Father, to be perfect even as our Father in heaven is perfect. So again, we ask that you will abide with us. We pray that your presence will refresh us, giving us rest during the holy hour of Jehovah's rest. That angels that excel in strength would also be with each and every one that are viewing and that are studying and fellowshipping, and also for those that may watch and study this message at a later time. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayers. We thank you for the forgiveness of sins. And we're praying also for the taking away and the blotting out of those sins just now in this times of refreshing. In Jesus' name, amen. Please turn with me to the book of Songs of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. This book is between Ecclesiastes and also Isaiah. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5, beginning where we left off on last Sabbath, the Bible says, I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard have I not kept. And so we can see here that there are many that are oppressed simply because of their nationality, their race, and their skin color. And what we mentioned last week is that there is no new thing under the sun. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is to come hath already been. For God requireth the past. And so we can see here that there was a family struggle. There was a controversy where there was one sibling that was made to be the keeper of vineyards, forced into slavery, as it were, because of her color, because she was darker. But yet, the Bible says, I am black, but comely. In other words, black is beautiful. And so we find that even in biblical times, there was a complex about one's character, one's ability, simply because of being black or a person of color. Being black was not something that was looked upon as comely or beautiful because of one's skin or their features or even their physical appearance, perhaps even their hair. They were looked upon as ugly, as not pretty, as not beautiful, not one that was intelligent, one that was wise or spiritual or had discernment. We find that there are those that are still to this day marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed, and downtrodden, and discriminated against, experiencing segregation and Jim Crowism economically, politically, and also even socially and spiritually because of their race. And again, this is not anything new. This existed even in times of Bible antiquity. For we find in the book of Numbers chapter 12 a story concerning the leaders of Israel in the time of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, as we know that God sent those messengers to deliver God's people that were in bondage, those that were oppressed, those whom God said, I've heard their groanings, I've heard their cries, and their sorrows, I know them, and I'm come down and deliver them out of bondage and from their taskmasters, from violence, and also from the spirit of oppression, which comes in many forms, many methods, where one can be oppressed, such as what we looked at on last Sabbath. But we find that once again in the family of Moses, amongst his own brother and sister, there was an issue, there was a problem of envy and also jealousy. And I want you to notice the cause for it in Numbers chapter 12, beginning in verse number 1. The Word of God says, and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. And when you continue to read the narrative, the Lord called Aaron and also Miriam and Moses and spoke to them and said that Moses was different from Aaron and Miriam, that if there was to be a prophet amongst them, that God would reveal himself by vision or by dreams. But he said that my servant Moses is not so, because Moses had a special relationship with God. He was the friend of God. He knew him face to face and spoke to him mouth to mouth, not just by visions and dreams and similitudes. Yes, Aaron and Miriam also were honored with the gift of prophecy, but Moses was the leading prophet. And he said, why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And you remember that as a punishment to the behavior, the attitude that Miriam manifested against Moses because of who he had married, an Ethiopian woman. Now, Jeremiah 13:23 says, can a leper change his spots or the Ethiopian his skin? And so we find that this Ethiopian woman was of a different race, a different nationality, although she was of the daughter of Abraham, because she was the daughter of Jethro, but yet she was a little darker than the rest of the Hebrew people. And so God showed his displeasure against injustice, against racism, against oppression, against racial superiority, simply because of the person's nationality. And God smote Miriam with leprosy, and she was shut out of the camp for 7 days. Nevertheless, Moses, being a very meek and humble man in the earth, had prayed for his sister, and she was healed and brought back into the camp. And I suppose that if God would do the same thing today among nations, or even in churches or in homes and in communities, that when somebody speaks out against someone because of their race and nationality, and if he punished them with leprosy, a most dreadful and terrible disease, I think that many would hold their peace, or at least they would think before they would speak these things. But of course, we understand that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And so when we talk about racial injustice and systemic racism or nationalism or national superiority, it is a problem of the heart, as it were. And Miriam simply just reflected that which was in her character, that which was in her spirit, that which was in her mind. Racism is an evil and terrible disease, just like leprosy. But now, what happens to a race of people who continue to be oppressed or downtrodden or marginalized or disenfranchised or segregated or not given a fair chance economically, politically, socially, and religiously? It's not just a national problem, but even a spiritual and religious problem that often goes on in churches of various denominations. What happens when you keep suppressing their cry and you don't want to hear their plea, or you don't want to give them that which the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence has promised them? What happens when you continue to systematically beat them down and to keep your knee on their necks? What's going to be the outcry, or what's going to be the response? What's going to be the backlash? Because obviously God has a response to systemic racism, as we see in the issue here of Miriam and also Moses and his Ethiopian wife, a woman of color. I want you to go with me to the book of 1 Kings chapter 12. The book of 1 Kings chapter 12. And we want to notice what caused separation and division in the United Kingdom of Israel. We know that ultimately Israel ended up dividing into north and south. We know that the 10 tribes in the north, which represented Samaria or Ephraim or Israel, and then also Jerusalem in the south, which was composed of both Judah and Benjamin, we know that there was a dividing and there was a scattering, as it were. But I want to notice with you in the Word of God the reasons as to why the kingdom of Israel was rent in fulfillment of the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, the prophet. When we look in 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, it says, "And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. And he said unto them, Depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. And the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, How do ye advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him." A terrible mistake does Rehoboam make here. Now he asked the old men that had lived with his father, those that were experienced men, how should I answer the people that are asking for the yoke of bondage to be made lighter? They counseled him with good counsel. They said, listen, if you will lighten the load, if you will speak good words to them, and if you will be a servant, then the people will serve you forever. You'll win their heart and their respect, and they will serve you not necessarily out of fear of the lash or being punished because of doing unlawful acts, but they will love you. They will be yours. But he forsook that counsel, and then he decided to listen to the young men of inexperience that had been brought up with him. And so the Bible goes on to say in verse number 9, and he said unto them, What counsel give ye that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. And now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, Come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So Rehoboam said, My father chastised you with whips. I'm going to chastise you with scorpions. You're asking for the yoke to be made lighter, but my little finger will be heavier than all my father's loins. So don't expect that I will treat you with justice and equality. Don't think that I will treat you as a human being that has certain liberties and rights and privileges that has been given by our Creator. Don't think that I will be kind to you or compassionate or merciful. I'm going to give you double oppression. Nothing is going to change. It's only going to get far worse for you. Notice what the Bible says, because this was actually a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, the prophet didn't say how this will come about, but he already knew that in taking a new garment and renting it into 10 pieces and giving it to Jeroboam, that the kingdom indeed would be rent in twain because of Solomon's apostasy. And now notice what it goes on to say in verse 16. It says, So when all of Israel saw the king, hearken not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. But as for the children of Israel, which dwelt in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, and all Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. So here we find that a people here that were oppressed, that were experiencing violence and also tyranny and not being treated as human beings, went to plead their case before the king. They wanted to see whether or not the heavy yoke that Solomon had placed upon them for 40 years would be relieved, whether there would be some type of reform or redemption or reconstruction. And yet we find that all they were told was to be quiet. What are you complaining about? You have it good. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make it even harder for you. I'm not going to just chastise you with whips. I'm going to chastise you with scorpions. And so we find here that Israel felt disenfranchised. They felt discriminated. They felt oppressed. And they said, listen, you see to your own house, David. We are going to go to our own tents and we're going to seek for our own justice, our own freedom. We're going to have our own kingdom and our own king and our own rules separate from you. And then Rehoboam wanted to add insult to injury, sent Adoram to go down and I suppose wanted to collect the taxes of the people or collect money from the people. But why should we give you any money when you're not trying to hear about our needs or our plight? Matter of fact, you're not even interested in us at all and what we are feeling and what we are suffering. You're not trying to reform in that way. So if we have no representation, then we're not going to pay you anything. And they ended up stoning Adoram. And the king said, I better get out of here. And they rebelled against him unto this day. And so we continue in verse 20. And it came to pass when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called him unto the congregation and made him king over Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. And when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah with the tribe of Benjamin, and 180,000 chosen men, which were warriors, to fight against the house of Israel, to bring the kingdom again to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. But the word of God came unto Shemaiah, the man of God, saying, Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and unto all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, saying, Thus saith the Lord, You shall not go up nor fight against your brethren. The children of Israel, return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. They hearken therefore to the word of the Lord, and return to depart according to the word of the Lord. So we find that because of the spirit of oppression, there was a separation. Then there was also rebellion against Rehoboam, as they saw that instead of the yoke being lighter, it would be made heavier. Not only will you have whips, but I'm going to add scorpions as well. So your burden and your suffering and your sorrow and your rigor and hard labor is not going to change whatsoever. And so we find that because of the rebellion, this then almost led to a civil war. But who was the one ultimately at fault? It was Rehoboam. If he would have spake kindly to them, if he would have showed sensitivity and compassion and mercy and try to understand their sorrow and their pain and their oppression, this would have never happened. And so we find that as it was then, so it is today. Oftentimes there is no progress when it comes to social justice and racial equality and equal rights unless there is a protest. And so thus we find in today's society, we hear a lot of criticism, a lot of backlash against the Black Lives Matter movement. And yes, we see rioting, we see looting, we see violence, which again we do not condone. But at the same time, there is a plight, there is a cry of injustice against systemic racism and police brutality against peoples of color. Of course, we support anti-racist police, but to those that feel as though they can treat someone any way they want, as though they can look upon them as thugs and as criminals and to treat them lower than the beast of the earth simply because of their skin color, because of their nationality, or because of their race, we find that the reason why there is such protest today is like in the story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, there is oppression and nothing is getting better. And so now there is a movement that has revived itself since the time of the death of Trayvon Martin 8 years ago. And then, of course, we have the civil rights movement in the 60s, which was equally criticized by the same evangelical Protestant conservative base today that is criticizing what we find in the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, of course, there is Marxism, there's LGBTQ, there's all type of ideologies that we do not subscribe to and that we cannot support as Bible-believing Christians, as remnant believers who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. But what we need to have is our own voice and our own movement to address the systemic racism and injustice and inequality that we find socially, economically, politically, and also religiously taking place in our nation. Just like Moses, we need to stand up and defend and avenge those who are wrongfully being abused and also oppressed, but instead of having the backlash and the insensitive comments and remarks that show no sympathy or compassion for the plight of black lives, simply because there are Confederate monuments being put down, Confederate flags that are being put down, there's changes that are taking place which are remnant of Jim Crow, whether it's in sports or whether it's in the food industry or whether it's in any type of industry or institution. Instead of there being criticism and instead of there being movements to try to counteract and to suppress the genuine need of racial justice and equality in our nation in particular, as well as in the world, we find that this is not the case. But we find that there are those that are pointing the finger and speaking vanity, not recognizing that when you continue to beat someone down, when you continue to mistreat them, when you continue to trod them underfoot, then eventually there's going to be a breaking point. There's going to be a backlash. There's going to be protests. There's going to be rioting. There's going to be looting. And yes, again, we don't condone these things, but as we said before, those that would criticize what's going on today would also criticize what happened in the 60s. Although there wasn't rioting, there was no looting, there was no violence per se by the civil rights movement, today we find that we're dealing with a generation that just says, we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to take it lying down. When we protest peacefully, we're still criticized, we're still marginalized, we're still thrown in prison. The dogs are sicked on us, tear gas is thrown on us, the fire hydrant also is placed upon us. We have no rights or no justice. And so now they do it a little more now, not necessarily with peaceful means, but with violent means. Then of course there's still criticism. But again, when we look at the story here of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, it was Rehoboam's injustice. It was his spirit of oppression and tyranny that caused the people in his day, the people that ended up anointing Jeroboam to rule over him, they said enough is enough. We're not going to take it any longer. And yes, it got violent. And yes, war was getting ready to take place. But we're not looking at the root cause as to why we see the nation angry today, the nations of the world with the spirit of anger. Now, what's interesting is that Rehoboam said, I'm not going to just chastise you with whips, but I'm going to use scorpions. Now, that was very significant. What do the scorpions represent in the Bible? That he says, I'm going to oppress you with scorpions, and my little finger will be thicker than all my father's loins. Turn with me to the book of Luke, chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. We cannot continue to ignore. We cannot continue to say things as though there is no systemic racism in America. There is no national superiority in the United States of America. We need to just get over it. We need to stop complaining. We have it really good. We need to just shut up and dribble, as many have also said as well. We cannot continue to do this and to think that there's not going to be any repercussions from a people that have been downtrodden and oppressed for centuries, that are just simply trying to have their social, economical, and political rights guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. We find in the book of Luke chapter 10, Luke chapter 10 and verse 17. Luke chapter 10 and verse 17, we're talking about what the scorpions represent here, that Rehoboam said, this is what I'm going to chastise you with. It says in Luke chapter 10, 17, and the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. So notice this, that the scorpions as well as the serpents, represent the power, all the power of the enemy. And we already know what the power of the enemy is based upon Acts 10:38. It's the spirit of oppression. And so when we talk about scorpions, we're talking about being chastised with the power of the enemy. When we talk about oppression and racism and slavery, this is satanic hatred and prejudice that is in the hearts and minds of men. In fact, it tells us also in Revelation chapter 9, the book of Revelation chapter 9, continuing to deal with the scorpion power and what it represents. The scorpions represent the power of all the enemy. Rehoboam was going to use satanic oppression and also violence against the people. Revelation chapter 9, beginning in verse number 5. Revelation 9, 5 and 6 says, "And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire death, and death shall flee from them." So scorpions are also associated with torment. And when we talk about torment, we're talking about torture. We're talking about being brutal, inhumane, no compassion, no mercy whatsoever, torturing people to the point where they would rather die as a sweet release from the type of cruelty that they are experiencing. There are some things that are worse than death. And the Bible tells us that the scorpion is associated with torment and torture. So Rehoboam was going to use satanic oppressive power against the people, and also he was going to cruelly torture them. Just like a scorpion sting places that poison all throughout the body, and every nerve and every fiber and every cell of the individual is so tormented that they would rather die so that they could be released out of the pain and suffering that they're going through. The Bible also tells us in Ezekiel chapter 2. Go back with me to the Old Testament. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 2. We're still talking about the scorpions. Scorpions, power of the enemy, satanic power. Scorpions, we're talking about being tortured, inhumanely treated, barbarism. And when we look in Ezekiel chapter 2 and verse number 6, notice what the prophet has to say here. Ezekiel 2:6 says, "And thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee. And though thou dwellest among scorpions, be not afraid of their words, nor dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house." So scorpions are connected with rebellion. They're also connected with harsh words and also inhumane, unsympathetic looks as well. So looks and words, briars and thorns that are used to cut and to pierce the flesh of individuals that are being inhumanely treated without justice, without mercy, without compassion, because again, this is satanic hatred and prejudice. This is what Rehoboam was bringing against the people of God. And so you find that when you're using oppression, you're using injustice, we're not going to sit down and really talk about these issues or bring about any reforms or changes, then yes, there is going to be rebellion. Yes, there is going to be violence. Yes, there is going to be a civil war, as it were, and this is Satan's studied effort. But you and I are either going to be on the side of the oppressed or the oppressors. And unfortunately, those that claim to be Christians, those that are of the Protestant world, and even those that claim to be Seventh-day Adventists, are not finding themselves at this time on the side of the oppressed, but rather they are supporting and defending the oppressors while they suppress and try to counteract those that just want to be heard, those that just want the same privileges, the same rights, the same freedoms, the same privileges, and not to be disenfranchised because they are black. It's interesting that even in the 1960s and 70s time period, you had the Black is Beautiful movement. Why did you have the Black is Beautiful movement? Again, it's because blacks were recognizing that no. I am not just a criminal. I'm not just a thug. I'm not just stupid. I'm not just lazy and shiftless. I'm not a rapist. I'm not a murderer. No, I'm a beautiful person made in the image of God. I am a Christian. I am intelligent. I am wise. I am beautiful. My life matters. And I shouldn't be treated differently just because of the color of my skin, but let me be judged by the content of my character. Well, that message was not heard. That was suppressed. And so we find that here we are in 2020 dealing with the same issues. But this time it's heating up because they're not being treated with whips any longer. They're being treated with scorpions. And it's not necessarily covert, but overt. It's clandestinely being done. There's codes and language and dragon speak that's being done. And so it's not necessarily being done in the open per se, but although we do see it happening more and more because it's being filmed, it's being captured on social media, so we cannot ignore it. Oftentimes, as I said before, without protest, there is no progress. And again, I'm not condoning all the different methods that are being used, but just understand the root, understand where they're coming from. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand their pain and their suffering and sorrow instead of acting like it's imaginary. Instead of acting like it's just a leftist, liberalist, socialist, communistic agenda. Let's not look at it through the eyes of politics. Let's look at it through the eyes of Christianity and through Christ and through Bible prophecy and through the righteousness of Christ. Now, Satan is the oppressor. I want to make that clear. And he often uses nations and institutions and kingdoms in order to get his policies and also his principles and his ideologies across through. Now, I want you to notice one of the chief agents that Satan used for centuries. Now, we already have Egypt on the record and the Egyptian bondage and slavery that the children of Israel went through, but it wasn't just the Egyptians that oppressed the Israelites. In fact, we go to the book of Isaiah chapter 14. The book of Isaiah chapter 14, beginning in verse number 1. Isaiah chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. I want you to notice one of the chief agencies and institutions that Satan used to cruelly oppress the people of God. We find in Isaiah 14:1, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and he will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them, and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids. And they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from thy hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. That thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked, and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. He that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted and unhindereth. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Why was there so much rejoicing at the fall of Babylon? Because Babylon was not just the oppressor of the Hebrew people, but they were the world's oppressor. They were used to smite the nations with a continual stroke. They ruled the nations and in wrath and in persecution. And so when Babylon falls, everyone rejoices because they don't have to live in fear any longer. They don't have to live in terror any longer. They can now have their rights and be treated as human beings that were once made in the image of God and called to bear the image of Christ. And so, but it's interesting that Babylon is known as the golden city. They're known as the oppressors. And God said there was going to come a time where the slaves would actually rule over their oppressors, and they would take them captive, whose captives they were for so long. Now, this is what Babylon did in the Old Testament. Notice in Jeremiah 51 what the prophet Jeremiah has to say about the character of Babylon being the nation that was known for oppressing the world. In Jeremiah 51, we're going to look here in verses 34 to 37. Jeremiah chapter 51, verses 34, beginning there, it says, Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out. The violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon, shall the inhabitant of Zion say, and my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea shall Jerusalem say. Therefore thus saith the Lord, behold, I will plead thy cause, and take vengeance for thee. I will dry up her sea, and make her springs dry, and Babylon shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons, an astonishment, and an hissing without an inhabitant. And so notice here that Nebuchadnezzar was an oppressor. He used violence. He crushed the people. He swallowed them up like a dragon. He cast them out. He made them an empty vessel. Nebuchadnezzar spoke like a dragon, had the dragon-like character of Satan. And the Bible says, my flesh, or my violence, and the blood shed, that which was done to my flesh, will be upon Babylon. And now what did God say? What was God's response to the cruel treatment that His people had received from Babylon, speaking like a dragon to them? He said that I'm going to plead your cause, and I'm going to take vengeance up for you, and I'm going to dry up Babylon, and I'm going to make her without an inhabitant, and she'll be desolate. Now, I want to look at the word plead for a moment in the Hebrew. It's very interesting when God says, I'm going to plead your cause. Talking about those that are suffering injustice, those that are being cruelly oppressed and mistreated and abused. Notice what the Hebrew says here, talking about the word plead. It says to strive physically with words, to conduct a case or suit legal. In other words, like a lawsuit. To sue, to make complaint, to quarrel, to contend against, to grapple with, to wrangle, that is to hold a controversy, to defend, to contend, to debate. So it's interesting that God says, I'm going to plead your cause, like a lawyer defends his client in a court of law. I'm going to debate for you. I'm going to contend for you. I'm going to grapple, and I'm going to hold a controversy for you. You will receive your justice. I will avenge you of the cruel treatment that you received under Babylon. Now, this was Babylon in the Old Testament, speaking and acting like a dragon. And of course, we can see that very clear in Daniel chapter 3 with the Hebrew worthies who would not bow down to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. We see him speaking like a dragon and throwing them into the fiery furnace. But the fourth angel, even the Son of God, got in the fire with them and sustained them for taking up a stand. But we see that he was trying to force their conscience and trying to get them to worship the image of the beast, trying to get them to worship the gods of the sun, moon, and stars. And yet God stood up and He pleaded their cause and He took vengeance for them. God never allows His people to suffer wrongfully without pleading their cause or taking vengeance for them. And we see that Babylon was to fall, not just because Bible prophecy said so, not just because of the 70-year captivity, but it was to deal with their crimes against humanity, They were going to be judged and punished and be destroyed because of their cruel oppression and their slavery and their torture that they put the people of God through. Now, this was ancient Babylon. What about spiritual Babylon? What about modern Babylon in the book of Revelation? Let's turn to Revelation chapter 18. The book of Revelation, chapter 18. Babylon in the Old Testament spake like a dragon. What about modern Babylon? Do they speak like a dragon as well? The Bible says in Revelation chapter 18, and looking here in verse 10, Revelation chapter 18:10, it says, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Now, I wonder why Babylon in the apocalypse is being judged. Why is she receiving plagues? Want to continue reading to get the answer. Verse 11 it says, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. I wonder, what was the merchandise that Babylon was selling to the merchants of the earth and the nations at large? Could it be that the reason why Babylon is being judged was because of the merchandise that she was providing unjustly and unlawfully to the merchants and the great men of the earth? Notice in verse 12, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and of fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner vessels of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beast and sheep and horses, chariots, slaves, and souls of men. Have we missed anything? Has anything been omitted? You see, Babylon was a great marketplace where you can get all your gold, all your silver, all your wheat and beasts and sheep and chariots, all the marble and cinnamons and odors. You can get everything from her. But yet God saves the worst for the last. Not only did she trade with the commerce of gold and silver and precious stones, but she also was involved in human trafficking, slaves and souls of men. Her greatest merchandise, that the merchants of the earth, that the sailors and those that had ships and shipmasters would profit by human flesh, human cargo. You can get it from Babylon, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, was the leading power when it came to human trafficking, slaves and souls of men. Now, when we look at this, did the papacy speak like a dragon? Was this dragon-like? As a matter of fact, where did she get her power from in the first place? Let's go to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13, as we look at the leopard-like beast coming up from the sea. In Revelation chapter 13, beginning in verse 1, it says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon her horns 10 crowns, and upon her heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. We know that the leopard is Greece. We know that the bear is Medo-Persia. The lion is Babylon. But the dragon that gave him his power, seat, and great authority is pagan Rome in a primary sense, or in a secondary sense. But in a primary sense, Revelation 12, we know that the dragon represented not only pagan Rome that sought to destroy Christ before he was born, and even the woman that was going to bring him forth, the Israelite people at the time, but also we find that the dragon represents Satan, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, that was cast out of heaven. Now, the Bible goes on to say in verse number 4 of Revelation 13, it says, "And they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given him to continue 42 months." Now, I want you to notice the power that was given him to rule for 42 months. What did he do with that power? Well, we know that he got the power from the dragon. And what does the dragon do? The dragon oppresses and torments and persecutes the people of God. It says in verse 6, "And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations." So notice that the papacy had dragon, satanic, oppressive power to bear against all the nations and the kindreds and the tongues. And that power includes the ability to be able to have captives and slaves and serfs and to engage in human trafficking for profit. It goes on to say in verse number 9, "If any man hath an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity, and he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints." Now, why does God say that in verse 10? "If any man hath an ear, let him hear. He that goeth into captivity is going to go into captivity." In other words, this power that led the people of God into not only spiritual slavery, but even physical slavery, would himself go into captivity and slavery. The one that was killing with the sword, with violence and with oppression and with death and with hunger and with starvation and with torture, inhumane acts, instruments of cruelty under the Inquisition period that were invented and inspired by Satan and evil angels, they too would be killed with the sword. This is where we see God pleading the cause of the saints and taking up vengeance for them. He's going to avenge them and defend them from the dragon-like power of the papacy. But as the papacy would receive his daily wound in 1798, a new beast would come up from the earth, and notice that he would carry on the same blasphemous power that the papacy had done for 1,260 years. In verse 11, it says here, talking about the two-horned beast, it says in verse 11, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed." Notice that the two-horned beast would come up looking like a lamb, professing the principles of Christianity, republicanism and Protestantism being the two horns of its strength. But yet and still, when he would open his mouth and speak through legislative and judicial processes, he would speak like a dragon. In other words, it would be oppression. It would be tyranny. It would be violence, persecution, and slavery as well. Was the United States ever guilty of slavery, even chattel slavery? Absolutely. In fact, in verse number 15 it says, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond." In other words, you had free people and you had slave people in the United States of America, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, oftentimes we will present this prophecy as though it's to be related in the future, when the mark of the beast will be enforced, or the image of the beast will be set up like it was on the plains of Dura in Babylon in Nebuchadnezzar's day. But I want you to understand that the United States of America, from its inception, has been speaking like a dragon, has been using violence and religious, political, social tyranny, bondage, slavery to 4 million slaves, people of color. America's not going to speak like a dragon. It has already been speaking like a dragon, and we see that the dragon voice is ancient Babylon and modern Babylon. And we see that modern Babylon had power over kindreds, nations, and tongues for 42 months. They led the people into captivity. They led them into slavery. They killed with the sword. And we see that they were involved in human trafficking, slaves, and souls of men. And it's very interesting that when we look at the transatlantic Middle Passage slavery of black Americans, we find that there were 5 nations that let out. We have the Portuguese, we have the Spanish, we have the Dutch, we have the French, we also have the English that let out in human trafficking. What was the religion of the Portuguese and the Spanish? It was Catholicism. And America, too, had its chattel slavery, which, again, is echoing the very spirit of the dragon, the very image of the papacy before it. Now, I want you to understand with me that God always pleads for the downtrodden. God always has a tender regard for the poor, for the widow, for the stranger that's in the gate. The Lord always defends and avenges those that are victims of oppression and tyranny and injustice and persecution. And even during the time when the slave trade was at its highest, God sent a judgment that affected these 5 nations that I mentioned as being part of the slave trade. Human trafficking, slaves and souls of men. Do you remember the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake of 1755? You remember that this was one of the signs of Christ's coming in Revelation chapter 6. As a matter of fact, let's read Revelation chapter 6. And it looks like we're not going to finish part 2. It looks like we're going to have a part 3. So if I find favor in the sight of God and my fellow friend and colleague, then I will return and we will continue this. But we're about to close on this point here. Revelation chapter 6. I don't want to give you too much. I don't want to cram it all in, and I don't want to rush. But Revelation chapter 6, notice this in verse 12, as we bring out this last point about not only the papacy, but the United States of America trading in slaves and souls of men, which is the spirit of the dragon. Notice in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, it says, "And I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" And so here we find that the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the mighty men, the free, and the slave or the bond were all affected by these signs of Christ's return. Yes, we have the great dark day. The sun turned into blackness or darkness, May 19, 1780. And then, of course, we know that the moon was turned into blood as well, same day, May 19, 1780. And then we have the star shower from heaven, the meteoric shower in November 13th, 1833. But oftentimes, we don't focus on the great earthquake that preceded the sign of the sun, moon, and stars. The earthquake that shook every mountain And every island, the mountains represent nations. They represent kingdoms that were shaken. The islands of the sea were also shaken as well. And many people were fearing and trembling because they thought that with these signs that the great day of his wrath is come. And who shall be able to stand the great wrath, the great day of the Lamb's wrath? Why was the Lamb so wrathful? Why was the Lamb, even Jesus, so angry? So full of indignation and fury that he sent this earthquake that preceded these other signs that were harbingers or footsteps of the near approaching Son of God coming again in power and in great glory. Let me read to you from Great Controversy regarding the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake. And listen to what we're told in Great Controversy, page 304, paragraph 2. And I want you to understand that the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake in 1755 was nothing more than God's anger, God's wrath, God's indignation, and God's judgment on all these slave-holding nations at this time in Earth's history, because it affected the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the English, and the Americas. Notice what we're told here. Great Controversy 304, paragraph 2. It says, these signs were witnessed before the opening of the 19th century. In fulfillment of this prophecy there occurred in the year 1755 the most terrible earthquake that has ever been recorded. Though commonly known as the earthquake of Lisbon, it extended to the greater parts of Europe, Africa, and America. It was felt in Greenland, in the West Indies, in the islands of Madeira, in Norway and Sweden, Great Britain, and Ireland. It pervaded an extent of not less than 4 million square miles. In Africa, the shock was almost as severe as in Europe. A great part of Algiers was destroyed, and a short distance from Morocco, a village containing 8,000 or 10,000 inhabitants was swallowed up. A vast wave swept over the coast of Spain and Africa, engulfing cities and causing great destructions. Brethren, this was not just a regular earthquake. This was one of the greatest earthquakes ever on record. And you notice that it hit all these countries that we mentioned. The 5 slave trading kingdoms that were leading out in the transatlantic Middle Passage enslavement of black Africans. Notice that it was the West Indies, it was Africa, it was Europe, the French colonies, it was Spain, Greenland, Norway, Sweden. All these places getting hit and cities being swallowed up. Why? This was not just a regular earthquake that we find. No, this was a divine judgment based upon the human trafficking that was going on at this time. Notice what it goes on to say. It says, it was in Spain and Portugal that the shock manifested extreme violence. Remember, Spain and Portugal were Catholic nations that were head of the slave trade. It says, at Cadiz, the inflowing wave was said to be 60 feet high. Mountains, some of the largest in Portugal, were impetuously shaken, as it were, from their very foundations, and some of them opened at their summits, which were split and rent in a wonderful manner, huge masses of them being thrown down into the adjacent valleys. Flames are related to have issued from these mountains. At Lisbon, a sound of thunder was heard underground. Immediately afterward, a violent shock threw down the greater part of that city. In the course of about 6 minutes, 60,000 persons perished. Again, in 6 minutes, 60,000 people perished. The sea first retired and laid the bar dry. It then rolled in, rising 50 feet or more above in ordinary level. This is exactly what happened in the Indonesian earthquake in December of 2004, that mighty tidal wave that wiped that part of the world out. in modern times. It goes on to say the other extraordinary events related to have occurred at Lisbon during the catastrophe was the subsidence of a new quay built entirely of marble at an immense expense. A great concourse of people had collected there for safety at a spot where they might be beyond the reach of falling ruins, but suddenly the quay sank down with all people on it, and not one of the dead bodies ever floated to the surface. Have mercy. This was supernatural. Normally, a body will surface. No bodies surfaced that were destroyed on this quay that was built up. Goes on to say, the shock of the earthquake was instantly followed by the fall of every church and convent. Wait a minute now. So it's not just buildings and cities that are being destroyed by the earthquake, but now churches and convents as well. I wonder what churches have convents that were affected by this earthquake in Lisbon, Portugal. Let's continue. The shock of the earthquake was instantly followed by the fall of every church and convent, almost all the large public buildings, and more than 1/4 of the houses. In about 2 hours after the shock, fires broke out in different quarters and raged with such violence for the space of nearly 3 days that the city was completely desolated. The earthquake happened on a holy day when the churches and convents were full of people, very few of whom escaped. That's taken from the Encyclopedia Americana on the article Lisbon in 1831. Wow, think about this. Churches and convents full of people. Perhaps they were worshiping. Perhaps they went to them as sanctuary cities. And yet they perished in this earthquake that hits the churches and the convents. Why the churches and the convents? It says the terror of the people was beyond description. Nobody wept. It was beyond tears. They ran hither and thither, delirious with horror and astonishment, beating their faces and breasts, crying, Miscandoria, the world's at an end. Mothers forgot their children and ran about loaded with crucifixed images. Hold on a second. Who are those that are church members that go to convents that have crucifixed images? This is talking about the Catholic Church. This is talking about Catholicism that the earthquake specifically struck. Notice, they thought that the end of the world had come. It says, unfortunately, many ran to the churches for protection, but in vain was the sacrament exposed. Again, another reference to Catholic worship. In vain did the poor creatures embrace the altars, images, priests, and people were buried in one common ruin. It has been estimated that 90,000 persons lost their lives on that fatal day. 90,000. Many people who were destroyed in their convents and churches, clutching to the altars, the crucifix images, the priests, all perished in one common ruin. 90,000. In 6 minutes, 60,000. And it hits more than 4 continents. Why does it hit this area? Because these were all the nations that were involved in human trafficking of black Africans. Do black lives really matter? Do they really matter? Well, to God, yes, they certainly do matter if He would send these judgments that have not been sent upon any other since this time. Let me read to you an article that came out just 2 years ago. In May 2018. Listen to this. Bear with me as I seek to locate this article. I want you to see, when we talk about Lisbon, Portugal, 2018, in the Atlas Obscura. I'm closing with this. A walking tour retraces Lisbon's painful legacy of slavery. It also highlights the city's modern African communities. I'm going to read from this article just a few excerpts to show you the reason why Lisbon, Portugal got the brunt of this great earthquake that affected more than 4 continents in the earth. It says here, Naki Gaglo begins his tours of Lisbon in the Praça do Comercio. Pardon me for my mispronouncing Portuguese or Spanish here. A grand plaza that once served as the commercial business district of Lisbon. Today, most tourists focus on the lemon-colored buildings and the triumphal arch built to honor Lisbon's survival and reconstruction after an earthquake in 1755. Notice they reference here the earthquake of 1755. This, again, was written May 2018, just 2 years ago. Listen, it says, Bagaglio brings his tour to the plaza for a different reason. Slave ships once moored here along the Tagus River. Gaglo starts in Praça do Comercio because he wants his group to begin to imagine how the architecturally stunning district acted as a brutal epicenter for human trafficking. This is the other side of Portugal that isn't well known, the African side of it. Gaglo says, in Europe, slavery is not taught the way it should be. I'm just trying to uncover what the secrets are and educate people about an important part of the history. And then, listen to this. Portugal was responsible for shipping 4.9 million people from Western Africa to Brazil, by far the largest amount of human cargo transported during the Atlantic slave trade. Did you hear that? 4.9 million Africans stolen from their land, stolen from their civilization, were brought to Brazil by the Portuguese. That's why Brazil has the largest population of black people or people of color outside of Africa. 4.9 million. This was a major slave trading post in the world, one of the majors. 4.9 million souls traded as human cargo, as though they weren't made in the image of God, as though God was not their father, as though they did not have rights, as though they were not human beings. Notice what it goes on to say. And yet, while traversing the cobblestone streets of Lisbon or sipping the barrel-aged red wine in Porto, there is little hint of the country's role in participating in one of the bloodiest man-made atrocities in human history. It is a missed opportunity to explore one of Europe's most breathtaking countries by taking an honest look at how culture, history, and racism still shape this gem on the Iberian Peninsula, as well as to highlight the rich cultural diversity of the country today. And so the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake was a judgment upon Rome, Catholic, as well as all the slave trading nations that were involved in the slaves and souls of men, speaking like a dragon, oppressing people simply because of their color. I am black, but comely. Look not upon me, O you daughters of Jerusalem, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me, they forced me to be the keeper of their vineyards. Other vineyards have I kept, but I've not been able to keep my own vineyard. And so we see that the papacy was at the head of the slave trade, and they were judged with the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake, as well as all those other continents that followed her example. And not only so were the nations of Europe and Africa and the Americas and the West Indies hit, but even the United States of America was also judged for their human trafficking and their chattel slavery in North America. But that is a message for another time. If we get the opportunity to return, we will share this with you as we move forward with the Spirit of Oppression, Part 3. Let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven. We see very clearly that you hate injustice. You hate systemic racism. You hate for the poor, for the widow, for the fatherless and the stranger, to be marginalized, to be discriminated against, to have to experience segregation, to be treated worse than an animal, to be labeled as shiftless, lazy, a rapist, a murderer, a thug, because of the color of their skin. But this is not anything new. We see this happening in Bible times. We see that Babylon was the oppressor that Satan used to oppress the people of God anciently and modernly. We also can see what happens when voices of protest are not heard. When people are only responded with scorpions. When people are responded with more oppression, with more bondage, with no compassion, no sympathy, no empathy, we can see that it will breed rebellion. It'll breed violence. It'll breed a civil war. All from the Word of God, we've seen these things. The papacy and the nations of Europe were judged in 1755. That Lisbon, Portugal earthquake was a judgment upon the abomination of the system of human trafficking, slaves and souls of men, people of color. The United States also likewise has been speaking like a dragon. They too are guilty. And they also were punished in like manner. Father, I pray that you would help us once again to be found on the side of the oppressed, not on the side of the oppressors. That we would be like Christ, who when anointed with power and with the Holy Ghost went about doing good and healing all those that were oppressed of the devil, for God was with him. Please help us, Father, not to remain silent, not to remain quiet, but to have our own voice, to have our own banner, to have our own movement and purpose, that of the third angel's message, which is to liberate a people, not only from spiritual bondage, but even from physical bondage as well. Thank you for the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. And help us, we pray, to be messengers of mercy, to be messengers of light, messengers of compassion, to those that need justice, to those that need the very ministry of healing that Christ came to give, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And we thank you for these things in Jesus' name.